He arose at daybreak, and was a little surprised as he entered the courtyard. He was not the first person preparing to leave, which was unusual. A black gelding stood saddled by the well, while nearby a woman in male clothing was washing her hands in the trough. Hearing Abelgat's footsteps, she turned, gathered her luxuriant black hair in her wet hands, and tossed it back. The messenger bowed. The woman gave a faint nod. As he entered the stable, he almost ran into another early riser, a girl in a velvet beret who was just leading a double grey mare out into the courtyard. The girl rubbed her face and yawned, leaning against her horse's withers. "Oh my," she murmured, passing the messenger. "I'll probably fall asleep on my horse. I'll just flake out. Oh." "The cold'll wake you up when you give your mare free rein," said Abelgat courteously, pulling his saddle off the rack. "Godspeed, miss." The girl turned and looked at him, as though she had only then noticed him. Her eyes were large and as green as emeralds. Abelgat threw the saddlecloth over his horse. "I wished you a safe journey," he said. He wasn't usually talkative or effusive, but now he felt the need to talk to someone, even if this someone was just a sleepy teenager. Perhaps it was those long days of solitude on the road, or possibly that the girl reminded him a little of his middle daughter. "May the gods protect you," he added, "from accidents and foul weather. There are but two of you, and women folk at that, and times are ill at present. Danger lurks everywhere on the highways." The girl opened her green eyes wider. The messenger felt his spine go cold, and a shudder passed through him. "Danger," the girl said suddenly in a strange, altered voice. "Danger comes silently. You will not hear it when it swoops down on grey feathers. I had a dream. The sand was hot from the sun." "What?" Abelgat rose with the saddle pressed against his belly. "What say you, miss? What sand?" The girl shuddered violently and rubbed her face. The double grey mare shook its head. "Siri!" shouted the black-haired woman sharply from the courtyard, adjusting the girth on her black stallion. "Hurry up!" The girl yawned, looked at Abelgat and blinked, appearing surprised by his presence in the stable. The messenger said nothing. "Siri!" repeated the woman. "Have you fallen asleep in there?" "I'm coming, Madame Yennefer." Now, why is this excerpt important, or even at all interesting? Well, I certainly hope that it's even a little bit interesting, because I wrote my bachelor's degree on it. So this is Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, the second novel in the Witcher series, and actually it's the fourth book in the series, but the first two were short story collections. And why am I using this specific book, or even more specifically, the opening chapter of this book as an example? Well, there's a very, very simple reason for that. Because this book is a very, very good example of focalization fiction. And you will understand why once I've told you what focalization actually means. The structure of this video is quite simple. First, I'm going to explain to you what focalization is, using some examples from Time of Contempt, and then we're going to take a look at another scene in Time of Contempt together to identify what we've learned. This video is basically my bachelor's thesis in a more entertaining form, so enjoy, I guess. So what is focalization? Often this concept is confused with the concept of point of view. It is not point of view. If there is something that you take away from this video, let it be the fact that focalization is not point of view. Well, what is it then? Here is the simplified definition of it from the Handbook of Narratology. A selection or restriction of narrative information in relation to the experience and knowledge of the narrator, the characters or other more hypothetical entities in the story world. This definition sounds pretty grueling when read without any explanation, so let me offer you this explanation. So, there are two things here that require a closer look. The term narrative information and the idea of its selection or restriction. Let's start with narrative information. Narrative information means any and all information about the story that you are reading or experiencing. Let's look at this in practice. Let us look at every single piece of narrative information present in one single sentence from the example from the introduction. He arose at daybreak and was a little surprised as he entered the courtyard. He was not the first person preparing to leave, which was unusual. We have a character that uses the male pronoun. This male character woke up and got out of bed in the morning. There is a courtyard and he enters it. We know now where this scene is taking place. We also learn the character's mental state. There is at least one character in the courtyard whom the male character notices. From this we can also deduce that the male character can see or in any other way sense that there is someone else. We also deduce from this line that the male character is also preparing to leave. So now we know his motivation of entering the courtyard and the scene. This courtyard is probably a public space. If this place belonged to the male character, he would be a little more than a little surprised to see someone else in his courtyard. For some reason, it is unusual for someone to leave as early as the male character does. There is something about the male character that pushes him into leaving early in the morning. That is pretty much all the information we can deduct from the sentence. Well, there is more if we really want to get nitpicky. The story world has people who use pronouns. The story world has people. The story world has public spaces, etc. We could keep going, honestly, but I hope you understand what narrative information is. Some pieces of narrative information are more important than others. The author doesn't need to spend so much time or effort explaining that people exist in the story world, but more effort should be given to the key events of the narrative. The fact that Applegat runs into Siri and Yennefer in the stable is an important event and is thus given more effort. Seeing Yennefer is granted a full paragraph, when the fact that it is morning is given just a couple of words. There also exists a concept called the completeness of narrative information. This stands for everything. I mean everything. It means every single little thing that takes place in the story world. To achieve completeness of narrative information concerning the opening except, we would need a couple more paragraphs. The scene takes place in the courtyard of an inn, so we would need to know all the people who are spending the night at the inn. We would need to know their names, their professions, their family histories, the rooms in which they are sleeping, why are they at the inn, where is the inn, what is the inn like, how many rooms, how big are the rooms, what kind of food do they serve, where do they get the ingredients for the meals, how much does a night cost, how long has the inn existed, who built the building, how many horses are in the stable, how old are the horses, mares, stallions, who owns the horses, what is the stable like, where did they get the materials for the stable or the inn itself. You see, we could do this forever, which is why the completeness of narrative information is a purely hypothetical concept. If someone does know everything, it would be the author, but most likely the author doesn't know everything either, and they don't need to know everything either. All we need to know are the important bits, which is why it is important that the narrative information is restricted. See what I did there? We went on a little journey and then we circled right back to where we started. I guess they do teach you something in university after all. The author controls the amount and kind of narrative information to convey to the reader. A simple example would be a whodunit murder mystery. The author knows the narrative information of the killer's identity, but withholds that information from the reader. The goal of this restriction is artistic. The author decides which bits to tell and which bits not to tell in order to tell the most compelling story in a compelling way. Now we know what the restriction of narrative information means, but there is a whole other half in the quotation from the Handbook of Narratology in relation to the experience and knowledge of the narrator, the characters, or other more hypothetical entities in the story world. The restriction can be embedded in someone or something. Here we come to the confusion of point of view. Schönert, who actually came up with the whole term of focalization, calls these characters or beings a situated focus. The utilization of focus means focalization. And the situated focus in which the focus is embedded is called the focalizer. A simple example. The focalization in a scene is embedded in a single character, where this character is the focalizer. This means that all narrative information that is conveyed to the reader is something that the character working as the situated focus is also privy to. In the opening example, Applegat is the focalizer. And here is where things get really interesting. Everything that is seen in the scene is conveyed through the experience of Applegat. Notice how I didn't say through the eyes of Applegat. This is where Schönert draws the line between point of view and focalization. He invented the term to avoid the two specifically visual connotations of the term. The narrator conveys the narrative information that Applegat is privy to. Not only what he sees, we also are told what Applegat hears. He hears what the black-haired woman is shouting from outside the stable. He has no visual of the woman, but the lines are still conveyed to the reader. Siri, shouted the black-haired woman sharply from the courtyard. Focalization embeds the narrator inside the situated focus. In this simple kind of focalization, we are inside the mind of Applegat. We experience the narrative information through his experience. Yennefer's hair is described as luxuriant, not by the narrator, but by Applegat. It is his evaluation of Yennefer, not a universal fact. A similar example is seen later during a scene where Geralt, the titular Witcher of the series, is visiting a legal service of Gruyter and Hünh. "Welcome, Geralt," said Gonringer. "Enter. Come right in. Do you have a case for me?" "No," said the Witcher, entering the large, gloomy anteroom which, as usual, smelled faintly of cat. "Not for you. For Fen." Gonringer cackled loudly, confirming the Witcher's suspicions that Fen was an utterly mythical figure. The word confirm is of specific interest here. It is later confirmed that Fen does actually exist, so Geralt's confirmation is wrong. But the word confirm is definite. It means that he is right. It is completely confirmed. There's no question about it. Fen does not exist, but he does. To those confused, Fen was male in the book. The confirmation is wrong, but it is confirmed in the mind of Geralt, and because Geralt is the focalizer in this scene, that is all that matters. An omniscient narrator might have mentioned that Geralt thought Fen doesn't exist. The narrator only narrates what the focalizer experiences. A false confirmation is confirmed. This is just a single type of focalization, something Schönert calls internal focalization. There are other types too, zero focalization and external focalization. Zero focalization holds no restriction of narrative information. This kind of narrative is non-focalized. Traditional narratives that use an omniscient narrator are zero focalized. The narrator just offers whatever information it wants without any restriction. External focalization uses a point of focus, but it exists outside of the story world. The usual example are stories that are told by a storyteller, a character that exists, but exists outside of the story world. But these types are not of specific interest in this essay. In this essay, I focus on internal focalization, because it is the type that Sapkowski uses to great effect, in my opinion. Internal focalization uses a point of focus that exists within the story. It is divided into three categories: fixed, variable, and multiple. This categorization is sort of useless, but we'll get back to that. Fixed means that the focalization uses just one single fixed point of focus. An example of this is the Harry Potter books. Harry is the focalizer in all of these novels, and all that the reader is told is experienced by Harry. Variable focalization shifts the focalizer at will. One scene the focalizer is one character, the next it's someone else. Internal variable vocalization is all the rage these days. Raise your hand if you ever read a book that titles each one of each chapter with a character name, indicating that that character will be the focalizer for the following chapter. I have. The Witcher books use internal variable vocalizer for the most part. The shift doesn't even have to be indicated or be restricted to a specific part of the book, like a chapter or even a single paragraph or even a sentence. Variable vocalization is so free form and versatile. No wonder it is so popular. Modern literature is often very character driven, so internal vocalization is the obvious choice. There is also multiple vocalization, and that is very artsy. It means that the same narrative events, the same narrative information is conveyed through multiple situated foci. Multiple characters' experience are conveyed to the reader. The reader is inside the head of many characters at once. Hard to pull off. I haven't really run into any narratives that employ this. Also, the focalizer doesn't have to be just one of the characters in the story. Focalization can also be disembodied, disentangled from any concretely perceiving being, and located at some narrating or telling point of view in space. If the author so wishes, the focalizer could be a tree, or a door, or a god. Honestly, whatever they choose. An interesting example of this is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, in which the internal focalizer is death. A great book. Focalization is not perfect, though. They all contain some alterations, pieces of narrative information that could not be conveyed with the current focalizer. The opening example includes one alteration. I wonder if you caught it. Schönert proposes two types of alteration or mistakes in the current code of the focalizer. These are the paralipsis and the paralepsis. Not at all confusing. Let's see what our father of focalization has to say. Paralipsis is the omission of some important action or thought of the focal hero, which neither the hero nor the narrator can be ignorant of. The narrator, for some reason, refuses to convey some piece of narrative information that the focalizer perceives. This does not include the specific details that I talked of earlier, like the other customers at the inn or the type of food they are served, but key information in the narrative. Something important happens in the story, and the focalizer experiences it, but it is still hidden from the reader. Paralepsis, on the other hand, is the inverse of this. In paralepsis, the narrator conveys narrative information that does not fit with the chosen focalizer, an excess of narrative information that doesn't make sense. There is a point of paralepsis in the opening example right here. "Siri," shouted the black-haired woman sharply from the courtyard, adjusting the girth on her black stallion. "Hurry up." Applegat is the focalizer in the scene, and it is established that the people inside the stable cannot see the people in the courtyard. This is indicated by the fact that the black-haired woman asks what is keeping Siri from coming out. "Siri," repeated the woman, "have you fallen asleep in there?" She asked if Siri has fallen asleep in the stable because she cannot see her. It would make no sense for her to ask this question if she could clearly see that Siri is awake and conversing with Applegat. So, it is established that there is no visual connection from inside the stable to the outside, but still, the narrator conveys the following action, adjusting the girth on her black stallion. How does Applegat know that? He cannot see her adjusting the girth. This action should not be conveyed to the reader, as there is no way for Applegat to experience it. This is an alteration, and they are extremely common. Alterations exist almost everywhere. Now, what makes focalization, especially within the Witcher books, really interesting is how it is used to activate the reader. So, Sapkowski does something that I love. It's a super simple and easy little thing, but in my opinion adds so much to a story. He attaches little identifying attributes to his characters. Geralt has milky, white hair, a sword slung over his back, and an ugly face. I'm not being rude, Sapkowski mentions it all the time in the novels. Also, a reason why not to cast fucking Henry Cavill for the role. I guess not anymore. Yennefer has black, beautiful hair, violet eyes, and an obsidian necklace. And she carries the scent of lilac and gooseberries, as we all know because we have played through the opening of The Witcher 3 at least 78 times. Ciri has ashen hair and emerald eyes and has the power to see into the future. All of the key characters have a couple of these characteristics, and now the reader can identify them with ease. Some other author also does the same thing with a certain wizard with half-moon-shaped glasses and a young wizard boy with messy black hair, etc. Because the scene in the opening example takes place in the fourth book in the series, the reader already knows all of these characteristics and is able to make the required deductions based on them. Looking at the opening example, we can now see why that scene is significant. Applegat is a new character. He hasn't been seen in any earlier novels, and he will not be seen after this opening chapter of the book again, making him an outsider character in the story. He is not privy to the lives of the key characters like the reader is, so in a way, the reader knows more than the focalizer does, meaning that the reader has access to narrative information that the focalizer doesn't. When we read the line, "Hearing Applegat's footsteps, she turned, gathered her luxuriant black hair in her wet hands and tossed it back," the reader knows instantly who this character is. There is no need to name them, even though Sapkowski does a bit later though. Honestly, I think it's a little unnecessary. The reader deduces that this character, who is honestly a nobody, has just run into a key character of the story. This scene is not about the focalizer. We are basically seeing a scene from a random perspective. It could have easily been told from the perspective of Yennefer, where she would have been worried about Ciri and would have been surprised to see some random dude appear out of nowhere, a random dude with hardly any significance to the story. But Sapkowski made him the focalizer because it engages the reader. If the scene was told straight about Yennefer and Ciri, using either or both of them as the focalizer, the scene would have worked exactly as it does, but the reader would not be as engaged. Putting the scene into the perspective of this random dude forces the reader to perk up their ears, or eyes, I guess, and really focus and read between the lines. The reader understands the story themselves. The reader realizes, hey, that's Yennefer, and that's Ciri, without any unnecessary hand-holding. And now the reader is activated. The reader plays a significant role in understanding and following the story, and the author doesn't have to do all the work. Suddenly, the storytelling is a cooperative activity. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but I love this shit. Using an outsider as a focalizer provides a great play field for this author-reader relationship to shine. The reader can follow the story, but also take part in the storytelling. Now that we've gone through the basics of how to use focalization to tell a story, let us take all that we have learned and put them in practice. There is another super interesting scene by the end of the opening chapter of Time of Contempt that uses all of these concepts to great effect. Applegat's path takes him to another inn, where he has a run-in with another key character. A cat that had been snoozing on the stove bench suddenly lifted its head and hissed, "A royal messenger." Applegat shuddered. The question had been asked by the man sitting in the shadows, who now emerged to stand beside him. His hair was white as milk. He had a leather band stretched across his forehead and was wearing a silver-studded leather jacket and high boots. The pommel of the sword slung across his back glistened over his right shoulder. Obviously, we can see that this man sitting in the shadows is Geralt. We know this because of the aforementioned key characteristics: hair white as milk, pommel of the sword over his shoulder. A hint is also given earlier than this paragraph. Here, a cat lifted his head and hissed. Earlier in the chapter, it was established that cats do not like Geralt. Why don't cats like you, Geralt? Does it have something to do with the... Yes, he interrupted. It does. The hints are used to activate the reader to the scene. The narrator does not mention Geralt's name once, but the reader knows who is the real main character of the scene. Let's continue. Where does the road take you? Where the royal will sends me, answered Applegate coldly. He never answered any other way to questions of that nature. The white-haired man was silent for some time, looking searchingly at the messenger. He had an unnatural pale face and dark eyes. The white-haired man is the moniker that is attached to Geralt for the duration of this scene, because this is how Applegate sees him. The narrator cannot use Geralt's name, because Applegate, the focalizer, does not know the name. Geralt's name here is narrative information that is restricted from the reader, because the current code of focalization does not allow it to be conveyed. I imagine, he finally said, in an unpleasant, somewhat husky voice, the royal will orders you to make haste, probably in a hurry to get off. Are you? What business is it of yours? Who are you to hasten me? I'm no one, said the white-haired man, smiling hideously, and I'm not hurrying you. But if I were you, I'd leave here as quickly as possible. I wouldn't want anything ill to befall you. Here, the reader knows more than the narrator or the focalizer. This line seems like a clear threat to Applegate, but the reader knows Geralt's personality. He would not threaten a random man he runs into at an inn. There must be some reason why he asks him to leave. I must let my horse rest, sir. An hour, maybe two. Indeed, nodded the white-haired man, upon which he lifted his head, seeming to listen to the sounds which reached him from outside. Applegate also pricked up his ears, but heard only crickets. There is a voice outside, but Applegate cannot hear it, thus the nature of the voice is not relayed to the reader. The reader also knows that Geralt, as a witcher, possesses superhuman senses. This line, at face value, could be read as, that crazy man seems to be hearing things. Instead is read as, there is a noise outside that can only be heard by Geralt's super hearing. Then rest, said the white-haired man, straightening a sword belt which passes diagonally across his chest. But don't go into the courtyard. Whatever happens, don't go out. A moment later, a horse neighed and hoofs clattered on the courtyard. 3 men entered the inn. On seeing them, the innkeeper began wiping the beer mug he was holding more quickly. The woman with the baby moved closer to her slumbering husband and woke him with a poke. Applegate gathered the stool where he had laid his belt and short sword and pulled it a little closer. Here we have an example of an alteration. How does Applegate know the relationship between the man and woman? He hasn't had a conversation with them to determine their relationship status. It is a piece of narrative information which our focalizer is not privy to. It is seemingly an assumption, but nevertheless is treated as fact by the narrator. This is an example of paralepsis. The men went to the bar, casting keen glances at the guests and sizing them up. They walked slowly, their spurs and weapons jangling. Welcome, good sirs, said the innkeeper, clearing his throat. How may I serve you? With vodka, said one of them. Fancy a drop, Professor? With the utmost pleasure, responded the other man, straightening a pair of gold-framed glasses made of bluish-colored crystal, which were perched on his hooked nose. As long as the liquor hasn't been alterated with any additives. These 3 men ring a bunch of warning bells to every reader. On top of their dangerous introduction, the reader already knows who these people are. Earlier in the chapter, while at Codringers, Geralt was warned that a trio of dangerous men have been hired to capture Yennefer and Ciri. Ralph Bolton, aka the Professor, Heimo Kanto, Little Yaksa. Do those names mean anything to you? No. All 3 are pretty handy with a sword. Upon the mention of the name Professor, the scene begins to make sense. Geralt has written this way to cut off these 3 and stop them from harming his family. On top of this, we see the titles given to these men by our narrator. Applegate wasn't at Godringers to hear the names of these men, and thus he doesn't know who these people are. Thus he doesn't call the Professor, but the man in glasses or the bespectacled man. The innkeeper poured. Applegate noticed that his hands were trembling slightly. The men leaned back against the bar and unhurriedly drank from their earthenware cups. My dear innkeeper, began the one in the glasses suddenly, I conjecture that 2 ladies rode through here not long ago, speeding their way towards Gorswellen. All sorts ride through here, mumbled the innkeeper. You could not have missed the aforementioned ladies, said the bespectacled one slowly. One is black-haired and exceedingly fair. She rides a black gelding. The other is younger, fair-haired and green-eyed, and journeys on a doubled grey mare. Have they been here? The characters in the story seem to be able to make use of these key characteristics just as much as the reader can. No, interrupted Applecat, suddenly going cold. They haven't. Grey feathers. Hot sand. A messenger? Applecat nodded. Travelling from where and to where the royal fortune sends me. Have you adventurously crossed the path of the women on the roan whom I inquired? No. Hey! Called the stocky one suddenly in a hushed voice, straightening up and looking out into the courtyard through the wide open door. Have a butcher's, Professor! Who would that be? Isn't that... The man in glasses also looked at the courtyard, and his face suddenly tightened. Yes, he hissed. It's undisputably him. It appears fortune smiles on us. There is someone outside, but Applecat cannot see him from where he is sitting, and thus the reader also not told who is out there either, though it is not hard to guess. Will we wait till he comes in? He won't. He saw our horses. He knows where silence, Yaksa. He's saying something. You have a choice. A slightly gruff but powerful voice resounded from the courtyard, a voice which Applecat recognized at once. One of you will come and tell me who hired you. Then you may ride away without any trouble. Or all three of you may come out. I'm waiting. Horson, growled the black-haired man. He knows. What do we do? The bespectacled man put his mug down on the bar with a slow movement. We do what we're paid to do. Out we go. It began at once. Groans, stamping of feet, the crash of blades, and then screams of the kind that make one's hair stand on end. The innkeeper blanched. The woman with dark rings under her eyes screamed too, clutching her suckling to her breast. The cat behind the stove leaped to its feet and arched its back, its tail fluffing up like a brush. Applecat slid into the corner on his stool. He had his sword in his lap, but he didn't draw it. There is a fight scene taking place in the courtyard, but Applecat, our focalizer, cannot see the action. He can only hear it. Therefore, the narrator only narrates what Applecat hears. Visual description is only given of narrative information that is inside the inn. Once again, the thudding of feet across boards and the whistle and clang of blades came from the courtyard. You! Shouted someone wildly, but even though it ended in a vile insult, there was more despair in it than fury. You! The whistle of a blade, and immediately after it a high, penetrating scream shredded the air, a thud, as if a heavy sack of grain had hit the ground, the clatter of hooves from the hitching post and neighing of terrified horses, a thud on the boards once more, and quick, heavy steps of a man running. The running man was heading straight for the inn, and it was clear he would soon appear in the doorway. But before he did, a blade hissed. Applecat doesn't know who is running towards the inn door right now. He can only hear someone getting closer. The reader is not sure whether it's one of the dangerous individuals running to safety, or if it is Geralt. Who is winning? Who is losing? The man screamed and lurched inside. It seemed as though he would fall across the threshold, but he didn't. He took several staggering, labored steps forward, and only then did he topple, falling heavily into the middle of the chamber. The crystal glasses fell on the floorboards with a clatter, and shattered into tiny blue pieces. A dark, gleaming puddle began to spread from beneath the body. Now we know who won the fight outside. I mean, of course, we already knew, but now we have confirmation. The glasses of the professor are mentioned to identify the dying man. There's actually an example of paralipsis in this scene as well. It takes a really long time for the narrator to tell the reader who this dying man is. Even though he has now entered the inn, even though he has now entered Applecat's sight, the focalizer is not unsure who this person is. The focalizer can see that this dying man is the professor. The reveal of the professor, the glasses, comes a bit late. This is a paralipsis. This is narrative information that the focalizer is aware of. Applecat knows and is able to see that this dying man is the professor. Yet the narrator does not convey this information. No one moved or cried out. The white-haired man entered the inn. He deftly sheathed the sword he was holding into the scabbard on his back. He approached the bar, not even grazing the body lying on the floor with a glance. The innkeeper cringed. "Those evil men," said the white-haired one huskily. "Those evil men are dead. When the bailiff arrives, it may turn out there was a bounty on their heads. He's to do with it as he sees fit. It may turn out," said the white-haired man a moment later, "that their comrades or cronies may ask what befall these evil men. Tell them the wolf bit them, the white wolf, and add that they should keep glancing over their shoulders. One day they'll look back and see the wolf. I hope you see why focalization can be such an interesting tool in an author's arsenal. This is one of my favorite chapters from the entire book series. It works so well, and the reason it works so beautifully is the clever use of focalization. This whole scene could have been simplified to focalize through Geralt himself. Geralt hid in the inn, waiting for the 3 men who were after Ciri and Yennefer. Then the men came and Geralt killed them. Of course, that could have been narrated to sound great, because that is basically what happens in the scene. But by simply detaching the perspective away from the main character makes the scene feel interesting. Now the reader isn't sitting on their couch being told what happens in the book, but the reader is taking part in the storytelling. The reader needs to read actively to follow the story, and I love how Sapkowski trusts the reader to know what is happening in the scene. I dearly hope that authors continue to experiment and innovate to tell stories in interesting ways. Thank you for listening. I am an English major with a bachelor's degree, and I specialize in literature in my studies. And doing this kind of literature analysis is something that I actually love doing. And I really hope that I will be able to continue to do this even after my time in school. Maybe this channel could be a way for me to do that. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this. If there's something I missed, then please comment down below. Or if you just found this interesting, please, I would love to read your comments and have a discussion about this. Also, if you do write a comment, I would really love to hear what did you like about the visual aspects of this video. I really tried very hard to make it look interesting, like visually interesting. So it would be like interesting to follow visually also. If you want to see more video essays like this, I would really love it if you subscribe to my channel. I have done a few and I want to do more, but right now I don't really have the time. I'm only capable of making this one because I'm currently on my summer holiday. I really do hope that once I am done with school, 2 more years of university, I will have more free time in my hands, and I would like to spend some of that free time doing these kinds of videos. So thank you so much for watching. I really do hope that I see you next time, and have a nice day.